Welcome to the podcast of MotorWeek, television's original automotive magazine. MotorWeek is made possible by Auto Value and Bumper to Bumper and TireRack.com. Here's your MotorWeek podcast host, John Davis.
Thank you, Alec Webb. Welcome, everyone, to MotorWeek podcast number 322. I am your host, John Davis. Hey, in today's podcast, we've got a lot to cover. First thing we're going to look at is the Lincoln Nautilus. Its midsize luxury utility has been redone with impressive new styling and technology. It's a much different vehicle, both inside and out. Over at Lexus, shaking up their lineup with an all-new three-row crossover, the TX. And Rivian's been in the news again with not one but two new SUVs with plans to make them at more affordable prices. We'll see about that. Plus a lightning round to discuss how your driving data may be used against you. And a viewer has a question on the upcoming electric Mini Cooper, if it ever gets here. Joining us today are our Over the Edge reporter, Greg Carlos.
Hey.
Our digital producer, Jessica Ray.
Hello.
And our writer extraordinaire, Alex Kellum.
Howdy.
Okay, let's get right into it. Before we do, though, I want to remind you, if you are fans of all things MotorWeek, but you've cut the cord, you no longer have cable, you don't have have you done that already?
Again, I do it every couple of years just to kind of
just to see what you're missing.
To a certain cable company who will not be named.
Well, if you don't have an outside antenna and you miss MotorWeek on your local public television station, we have a solution. We are streaming. You can watch MotorWeek, and for that matter, other fine PBS programming anytime, anywhere, on just about any screen with the free PBS app. So go to your app store and download it on your device or your smart TV today. Don't miss another episode without it. Okay. A 48-inch panoramic display, literally from door panel to door panel. Massaging seats, an in-cabin aroma dispenser. I've never really been crazy about those, but there you are. You're probably thinking that we're talking about yet another Mercedes or any German luxury brand, but we're not. We're talking about Lincoln. The all-new second-generation Lincoln Nautilus, to be exact. Alex, why is it so different? What makes it such a really a high watermark for Lincoln, at least in the last few years?
Well, for a few reasons. You've kind of listed some of them right there. I think, luxury buyers, of course, are going to care about that in-car, that in-cabin experience, and that has changed quite a bit. But to give a little bit of context first. So, yes, this is the Lincoln midsize luxury utility.
So it's 5-passenger.
5-seater. It is entering a new generation for the 24 model year. Now, it has grown a little bit, but it has not grown substantially. So we're talking about, I think, like a 2-inch increase to the wheelbase. It's up to 114 inches. And
about 3 inches overall, I think.
Yeah, it's 193 inches overall. That's about a 3-inch overall increase. So that does mean a little bit more cabin room, a little bit more leg room in that second row. But that's not really where the action is. It's in that front row with a 48-inch panoramic display. So that is
4 feet for you people counting at home.
Kind of describe, though, how they've done it, because what they've done is pretty. It's almost like being in an airplane.
It's unique, for sure. Yeah. No one has really done this.
It is pillar to pillar. It's so if you're sitting in the driver's seat, imagine you're sitting there in your nice luxury new Lincoln. You've got this huge, at least horizontally spanning display. It doesn't stand up very tall. It's very, very close to that bottom sill of the windshield.
And it's at the top of the dash.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, so it's sitting, again, pillar to pillar, top of the dash. But then over there in the center stack, you have a smaller touchscreen unit. So that's about an 11-inch unit or so. And that's how you're actually contrling various
so you're not
functions.
Reaching
you're not going to reach for this 48-incher. You're going to use this little center stack there. But that large display is customizable. So you can, of course, you have like the vehicle information and stuff there. But it can show like the weather. Of course, it's going to show your music. And
navigation,
navigation can be up there.
And because it's so much to see, they've done something special with the steering wheel that I'm not necessarily a fan of. They've made it more oval shaping,
yeah,
so you
yeah.
can see it better. And those of us that have been around long enough to have messed around with oval steering wheels know that they are sometimes not the best. But anyway, go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, I please interject wherever you can. I did not drive this car. The guy we sent out to drive, Steven, who's dead to us now. He's,
Now that means Stephen has left us for what he felt was a better opportunity. Stephen Truitt, go ahead.
Best of luck to him if you're listening. My office feels empty now. But yeah, so he called it a spa on wheels, and when he described it to me, I would probably have to agree with him. So one of the things that they have is this new digital scent feature, or at least that's what they're calling it. You have these aromas that you preload into like an armrest kind of storage unit, and it'll put these out whenever you want, so you can smell different things. I don't know what the scents are, but I assume
Why do
they
they
smell
call it
nice.
digital aroma?
You know,
I don't
that's just what I read.
It's like
I don't.
digitally controlled.
Yeah.
But it's actual aroma.
It's
right?
yeah.
Yeah, it is.
It's not fake.
Yeah, I'm just.
It's not holographic
Yeah,
meatloaf.
I think
No.
the logic behind calling it like a digital scent is like you can look like a Mercedes. You pop in a scent into the glove box, and it's just the one scent. But this one, you pop 3 in, and you can be like, oh, I want to pick this
So
flavor.
depending
or
on
this
time
flavor.
of day or how you
I
feel.
want
Yes.
seaside breeze today.
Yes,
Right.
I don't know if that's a
exactly.
scent, but I assume
But
it
they did
is.
add a couple scents specific to this Nautilus, so there's like 7 total.
Is there an
or something.
aftermarket scent game? I haven't
I don't
really followed
know.
this
That's a
closely
good
enough because, like, when the S-Class had it years ago, yeah, like you said, it was the one scent. But there's got to be somebody mixing up new scents.
We'll have to go check.
Yeah, I mean, like, how many
Amazon
different
Prime.
candles are there now? There's got to be car
Oh yeah,
scents.
Yankee Candle's going to get on the digital scent.
True, why not
Yeah,
Yankee
yeah.
Candle or like Bath and Body Works or something?
Absolutely, yeah. Bath and Body hurts. Yeah. Anyway, yeah. So apparently through an over-the-air update soon, they're going to add a new rejuvenate function. So this is, you get home after a long commute. Maybe you were on the war
this thing
zone.
drive?
That is, yeah. Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
there
we're
is
10
there-
minutes in and we haven't talked
Believe
about
it or not, there
starting
is
it
an
up
engine.
yet.
I'll get to that very quickly. But just to follow up on that, you get home, you know, driving all day, you can relax for 5 to 10 minutes. It'll massage you. It'll lean you back. You got the sense.
But so it's got a lot of features on it,
got a
and
lot of
that my
things.
intro basically said that you don't expect on a domestic vehicle.
Right.
And I mean, I've seen the pictures and the video from the event. And that interior on the Black Label was so nice. Like just looking at like the way that the screen is laid out, not just that, but the seats itself. Like I think they had like a nice red burgundy color, and just the materials on it, just from the photograph, looked incredibly plush.
And mind you, that the Black Label's like $75,000.
Yeah,
so-
and I was going to say that normally we kind of save, or at least I do save pricing for the end because, you know, it's climatic or whatever. But just to mention that here, they started about $50,000. And then, yeah, Black Label, which is kind of at the top there, I mean, you're talking 75. So all things considered.
Does 50,000 get that panning screen?
Yeah,
So
that
that's
is
just a
standard.
standard feature.
That is
That's
standard,
cool.
yeah.
That's standard.
That's gonna bring
all-wheel
people in.
drive,
Yep, and
standard.
that leads me to the powertrain.
Yeah.
So gone is the V6. You have 2 options now. All-wheel drive is standard, but the base unit, that standard engine, is a 2-liter inline-4 turbo.
Naturally.
Yep. And that one is paired to an 8-speed automatic. You're looking at about 250 horsepower there, 280 pound-feet of torque. But then the next option is a hybrid version. So it's not a plug-in. This is just a hybrid. Now it's still that 2-liter turbo 4. That part's the same. But now we have an eCVT, and I'll get to that in a second. But just so you know, just for reference, that's 300 horsepower output and 295 pound-feet of torque. Again, all-wheel drive is standard. So we were talking a little bit about eCVTs the past couple days.
Electronic, continuously
Yep.
variable transmission, which is not to be confused with the
this-
traditional
Yep.
CVT.
So I have a little write-up here. Please correct me if any of this information is wrong. I've tried to do as much research as possible without getting too technical here. So traditional, like that automatic, that 8-speed I mentioned, you're pretty much talking about something that has the set gear ratios in it. This is going to be a gross oversimplification of it, but just bear with me. So you have all these different gears. The transmission, as the name implies, automatically goes through those gears, giving you what's going to be the best depending on like your RPMs, your throttle input, things like that. You may have a direct drive gear, which is a 1-to-1 ratio. For better fuel economy, it'll go into an overdrive gear, so it'll engine will spin a little slower, you get better fuel. Mash the pedal, it'll kick down a gear, you get better performance. Great, that's an automatic. A CVT is going to be without those gears. It is using bands and pulleys
And
or
two cones,
chain.
basically
Yeah,
two cones
conical
with a band,
there's
either
conical
metal
shape.
or fabric running between
The
them.
pulleys will be somewhat cone shaped.
Yeah.
The band stays, you have an input shaft and an output shaft. The band is going to stay the same length, but those pulleys, and correct me if I'm wrong, but those pulleys, that they create kind of like a cone or like a groove in the middle there through those cones, and those pulleys kind of expand or contract. They're changing in
And the belt
size.
moves up and down
Yeah.
the pulleys.
And so what happens to one, the opposite happens. So if one expands, one of those shafts, the pulleys expands, the other one it'll contract, and vice versa.
And the idea is to keep the engine at a pretty constant RPM
Right.
for best fuel economy.
Yeah, and that's one of the perks there to having a CVT would be the fuel economy. The other thing to note is there's no like jerky shifts or anything like that. You're not going to feel. I mean, they can simulate that kind of stuff in them for whatever reason, but generally speaking, there's no shifting. So an eCVT is even different still. So here in the Lincoln, for example, so Ford has like the power split, I think is what they call it. Toyota has a system that's very similar to this as well. It uses an electric motor as that electric assist there. So it's tethered to this whole
But it still has
drive
it has a
system.
gear
it still
set.
Has, it still has a planetary
gears.
gear set in
so
there.
in that aspect, it has something in common with a regular automatic.
Correct.
But that's about where it ends.
That's about it. There's no clutch. There's no torque converter as far as I know. This is using an electric motor to help modulate the speed. It's to the same extent of a CVT as it's trying to keep it in that power band, that RPM, that efficiency.
Right. I think that's a good explanation.
I'm glad someone.
Here's the big takeaway. A lot of people are, and it's not justified. Early CVTs had problems with the belts. The ones that they've been banking for the last 10 years, many car makers went to a metal belt instead of a rubberized fabric belt. Most of the reliability problems went away, but it's still this stigma. And so the actual beginning of this eCVT, I found a Society of Automotive Engineers paper from 1988. So this is not brand new technology, but it's taken basically until now to get to production. And it takes the concept of a fuel-saving CVT to the next level without the worrying about any kind of durability issues from some kind of belt running up and down pulleys.
Well, the important thing to really note about this is that,
I actually thought what I said was pretty important.
that we're talking about this in the concept of a hybrid.
Right.
So because hybrids use electric motors within their power or need electric motors within their powertrains to function as a hybrid, it pretty much is a no-brainer to incorporate an eCVT into that powertrain. And another thing to really mention compared to a traditional CVT, that these function theoretically differently. They just are both continuously variable.
Yeah, the end result is similar,
Exactly.
but they are totally different inside.
And there are a lot less moving parts in the eCVT compared to a traditional CVT.
Which was an advantage over on automatic because there were fewer parts in there than a traditional automatic.
So these are probably some of the most reliable transmissions that you can buy,
we think.
actually.
They haven't been out yet. Let's move on, though, to the driving experience because that's notable in this vehicle, at least from what I read from Stephen's notes. He basically found it was very competent. Do you have anything to add to that?
I mean, the word that he just kept using, and I had to kind of heckle him a bit so I could get as much drive impression as possible for my writing. Comfortable. That was the one word that over and over and over again he had mentioned, whether it was, of course, like sitting in the cabin and having all the plush materials, but just the on-road experience, just very soft, very comforting.
What you expect from a Lincoln.
Right, exactly. And I mean, me and Jess were talking about it this morning about like when you think of luxury vehicles, a Lincoln may not be the premier brand that comes to mind. It may not be at the top of your, like we said in the intro, you think of these like German brands or whatever, they're also going to cost a whole bunch. What you get out of this experience, I mean, Stephen was nothing short of impressed. I mean, he really thought this was a competent and comfortable.
You know, we're all car people, but Stephen's like you, he's a big Mustang fan. So
Oh, 1,000%. Yeah.
I just want to wrap this up by just pointing out to folks the previous Lincoln Nautilus was a rebadged MDX, which itself was based on the Ford Edge. This is an all-new chassis, and it's actually made in China.
Yes.
It's being assembled there. So this is a unique vehicle that at the moment anyway is not being shared with the Ford brand. And I think that's part of Lincoln's strategy of separating themselves more from the Ford brand. And if you think that's unusual, Buick's been bringing in Chinese-made SUVs for a long time.
And just one correction, MKX. I think you said
What did I say? MDX?
Yeah.
MKX.
Just want to correct that.
Thank you. I knew there was something in there that...
I was going to say, man, I
two-
missed the part where Acura jumped in.
Well, we're gonna jump to some other
Give the guy a break. We were
acronyms.
talking
keep me on the straight
talking
and
about
narrow.
ECVTs.
No, I get it.
MDXs,
There's too many letters combinations here, and we're moving to another one.
We can get into that. That's a whole nother thing. The letters are just so confusing. Anyway.
Too close.
Okay. Thanks very much, Alex. That was extremely thorough. All right. Now let's go talk about another SUV. After discontinuing, over at Lexus, after discontinuing the long wheelbase of the RX, you probably remember that as their attempt there to give a three-row luxury SUV on a car-like chassis. Lexus didn't have a three-row crossover in their lineup, but they do. And they've got the truck-based LX and GX, of course, but a lot of people want something that basically is the new term soft rotor, which is a term that we don't use a whole lot. Well, okay, enter the 2024 Lexus TX, the brand's first purpose-built three-row crossover. Yes, it is related to the Toyota Grand Highlander. But Greg, tell us what the differences are. Tell us a little bit more about the TX, and should somebody pony up for the extra money for a TX over a Grand Highlander?
That is an excellent question, which we will definitely get into a little bit later. But the differences, there aren't many.
And that's kind of it, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it is. And we talked about a Grand Highlander on the previous, on a previous podcast, and I think I spent way more time in that one than I did in this Lexus TX. But obviously you have styling changes. You need to separate the two, what are essentially the same vehicle. I mean, down to even the powertrain, even though the Lexus does get a plug-in hybrid version, which the Toyota does not offer. So you have to separate it with styling. So looking at the grille, you have that whole, God, what are they calling it?
Spindle grill.
They still call it the spindle grill.
I guess.
Even though it's not as like spindly as it used to be. I remember
It's
people
just bold.
hated that grill.
Well, I still do.
Even though it's still
to be
around,
honest with you.
they've kind of changed it around enough to maybe bring less attention
And to make
to
it
itself.
sparkle now.
Because like the grill is less of a prominent, the way they color it with the body color, like it's less of a grill and more of like a fascia. And then the inside, it's materials. That's how you do it. You add a little bit nicer leather. Switch gear is a little bit different, although the shifter is almost identical, if not exactly identical.
I'm pretty sure it was the exact same.
Yeah, because that's what I noticed immediately in the Toyota Grand Highlander. I was like, wow, this is a Lexus shifter. I'll get more into that a little bit later. So there's that. There's even the door handles to get into the car. That was the first thing I noticed was in the Lexus. It's like an electric door handle, which actually does not pull out. You put your hand in there, you grab it, and there's a little button behind it, and that activates the door actuator. The Toyota, on the other hand, is just your traditional pull handle.
And then you have the door handle button on the inside, too.
Correct. Yeah, it's electric. It's like a Corvette. It's electronic. Then there's like at first I thought the infotainment screens were exactly the same. They're not upon further review. Toyota, while it's a big screen in the Toyota, it's not quite as big and fancy looking like it is in the Lexus. That's probably to me like the big wow factor of
when you
the Lexus.
get inside of it.
Yeah, it's huge, and then not only that, it's the switchgear on the bottom, big knobs on the bottom of the Lexus.
For old folks like me that basically have arthritic hands.
I love it. I'm not quite old folks yet. I'm getting there, but I love it. But it looks a lot cleaner. It's kind of like I think the Mach-E might have debuted the whole concept of having the climate control readout like in the middle of the knob. You know what I'm saying? So like when you're scrolling this giant knob to change the temperature, you're seeing the degrees go up or down in the middle So like it's literally a button or a knob on the screen, which is a very cool, like high-end looking feature. And then powertrains, they both have a 2.4 liter turbo i4. The TX 350, which is the one we tested, 278 horsepower, 317 pound-feet of torque. That's the nice benefit of the turbo, is having that extra torque. You can get a hybrid based on the same engine. And as I mentioned before, the Lexus TX does offer a V6 plug-in hybrid.
But room inside is basically
that's
the same.
right, exactly. Room inside, like your same family will fit exactly as it does in the Grand Highlander as it does in the Lexus TX. It's just that, so the Grand Highlander, I think, finishes at about $55,000, and that's basically where the TX picks up and goes up to about $78,000 for that plug-in hybrid. And now, like, we've kind of gone over what the Grand Highlander and TX already is, and that kind of led me to think of, like, where is the separation now of Lexus and Toyota? It seems like it's kind of evolved over years, and John, you can probably speak to it more.
Well, yeah, it is, but what you're witnessing is car makers, relatively new car makers to this country, like Hyundai and Kia and others, pushing up from the bottom, adding more and more features onto their vehicles, which of course then the Toyota brand and Honda and everybody else has to respond to. And they're basically squeezing that difference. There used to be a big premium middle market. That's kind of gone.
Yeah.
It's now either mass market or luxury, and they're squeezing that together. So, and yeah, Toyota and Lexus have a history of offering Toyotas that were almost a Lexus. I think of Avalon versus the ES at Lexus. But don't let me interrupt really your thought.
No, it's good. I'm trying to think of what spawned this question to me, and it was actually we had somebody else who works at MPT was looking into buying a 3-row SUV, and we happened to have a Grand Highlander in, and then we had the TX in not too long after. And my advice was, after having driven them both, was like, I mean, if budget is a thing and you don't need to have the best, I would go with the Grand Highlander.
Yeah,
I think you get a lot of what you get in the TX. And it really didn't start here. For me, it was the Venza a few years ago when they brought that back. That was like, I remember the first time I got into the new Venza, the brought back Venza, and thinking like, wow, this is way closer to Lexus than any other Toyota I've been in. Then the Crown comes out. You know, you have the 4-door sedan lifted. That's approaching Lexus too.
Absolutely.
So then you're starting to wonder, like, okay, well, what's Lexus's function here if I can save a little bit of money and still get pretty good luxury? But then, okay, the Toyota brings out the Land Cruiser again. Now they have something a little bit smaller, off-roading minded. Lexus now has the answer to that, which is a much bigger the GX.
Yep.
So like I kind of my answer is I'm not really sure what they're doing.
I think
but it feels like just when I think they have separation, then I see something like the Grand Highlander. I'm like, well, there's not that much.
I think it matters that this is the first generation of the TX, and if they follow their history, for instance, like most people don't realize that the RX, which is the vehicle that saved Lexus from oblivion, is closely related in chassis to the RAV4. But as each successive RX has come out, that separation has widened. And the current RX, which was new last year, I believe, we haven't had the new RAV4 yet. So it's leading the RAV4. And I suspect that a few years down the road, when they do a new TX, because I'm sure it will be popular, and I bet they don't wait 6 or 7 years, it'll probably separate itself more from the Grand Highlander. I think that's what their modus operandi is. But they've got to move up market to compete against Audi and Mercedes and BMW. So,
to me, it seems like a lot of the difference specifically between the Grand Highlander and the TX, but also like, say, GX and Land Cruiser or even 4Runner is powertrain. It's almost like those are the main differences between them. I mean, and
Well, you
probably
have so
tuning,
many.
suspensions. But like, for example, like the TX, if you're looking in this segment and a plug-in hybrid is your
You have
like
to
you
go to the
want a
TX.
plug-in hybrid, you have to buy a TX. If you're looking in this segment and you want a fuel-efficient hybrid, you have to go with the Grand Highlander because they both have hybrid max powertrains, which are the performance hybrids and not the fuel-efficient hybrids. But like, and if you want towing, I guess you could go either way.
Yeah, I mean, we could go off on a tangent here. That
But-
kind of that marketing kind of confuses me.
well,
a
But
little
then
bit.
it's like the same thing with the GX and the Land Cruiser. One's a 4-cylinder, the other has the twin-turbo V6. Like, those are the hugest differences.
Toyota, Mercedes, to a slightly lesser degree, BMW and Audi, they have sliced the SUV pie so thinly
Yeah.
that really it's a matter of put your wants on a piece of paper. They've got something that's a very narrow slice of the SUV market that will work for you. But in this case, we're talking about a big slice of the SUV market. And they're all looking over their shoulder at not only Mercedes, Audis, and BMW, but Genesis and what Hyundai and Kia are doing, which is moving steadily up market. So anyway, what's your conclusion? TX, all the advantages of a Grand Highlander, just a bit more money and a slightly different powertrain.
Yeah, I mean, I went into this before I started my research, just going off of what I remember from being in these cars, because it was like a month or two ago now, and I wanted to say definitively that you're getting most of what you get in the TX that you'll get in the Grand Highlander. I went back and looked at some things. I think there is enough of a distinction to really say if you really want luxury, the TX is the answer, and the whole plug-in hybrid powertrain. But if you're like at all on the fence, my personal opinion is just save yourself a little bit of the money and just stick with. You can get yourself a really nice Grand Highlander for the price of what the TX starts at.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to also mention was I wonder how much of this plays into target marketing, like demographics. And I say that in a sense that if you look up both cars, as I totally did not just do on my smartphone, if you go to their respective homepages, so Lexus and Toyota, and I kind of knew this going into it, the Lexus, a lot of the photography, a lot of like what it's kind of portraying the vehicle as is like, this is upscale, this is urban crawling, and that's the idea. And I'm not knocking that, I'm just saying that is what it is. The Grand Highlander, I mean, you guys can see it right here. Here's a guy loading his skis into the back. So does the Toyota buyer, are they gearing that more towards, this is the person that's going to take the vehicle and is maybe going to go.
Family.
Yeah, and their family. And they're going to go on adventures and they're going to go do things. Whereas the Lexus buyer, I'm not saying they won't, I'm just saying that's not the market they have in mind.
But Lexus still has that buyer because they put them in the GX. That family
Absolutely.
who's putting their skis in the Grand Highlander could also be putting their skis into the GX, where they
totally
probably
agree.
wouldn't be doing it.
Sure.
It's funny. You're right. You bring up a great point about the marketing, because there are plenty of people who will just buy a Lexus
Because it's a
you can get a
Lexus.
Lexus, or you can
Right.
get the TX and the Grand Highlander as close as possible, but they will always go Lexus because it is a Lexus, and Lexus has status over Toyota.
Right. I mean, we could get into that discussion
Yeah.
all day long about
Not to
things
say
like
there's nothing
the
wrong with
NX
that.
and
I'm
so
just
no,
saying
that's
that's
absolutely.
definitely a reason people buy cars.
But it is kind of a good segue into something we're going to talk about later in the show, status and luxury for that matter. Stick around, because later in the show, we're actually going to talk about not one, but two new SUVs. It looks like it's an all SUV show today almost.
Sorry, guys.
From Rivian. They have just unveiled the R2 and R3, so two smaller SUVs, and we'll talk extensively about what we know about those. But before we get on to other topics, I do want to stop and thank the sponsors of not only this podcast, but also of the show you see on television every week or your phone, MotorWeek, Auto Value, and Bumper to Bumper, along with our friends over at TireRack.com. We know our viewers and listeners appreciate your dedication to MotorWeek. I tell you, folks, we do too. Thank you very much for being a part of our series for so long. How about our lightning round, everybody? This traditionally is where we give everyone about 30 seconds to talk about a trending automotive topic.
We've got our bell.
Here's one. Oh, the bell is back.
It's here. It's around.
Very good. Recently, none other than the New York Times reported that drivers were facing higher insurance rates after their driving data was unknowingly shared with their insurance company. Surprise, surprise. Okay. For example, one driver of a leased Chevrolet Bolt EV, which means he does not own the vehicle, by the way, it's a lease, learned that their information was shared with their insurance company after he saw his rates go up 21%. The driver claimed that they were unaware that driving behavior was being tracked and shared. What does everybody make of this? Is anyone really surprised?
I just want to go on record and say that one of my first press events here in 2012 was at Ford's Proving Grounds in Dearborn. And they showed us this kind of stuff. They're like, it's monitoring where you're looking. It's monitoring your accelerator inputs, your braking inputs, all this stuff, so that you can like teach yourself to be about. Like the way they were spinning it was like, this is a good thing. My first thought was like, they are going to sell this to insurance companies as soon as they can, and here we are. So
and here we are.
I think that's, and there's no, look, insurance companies do this. You can plug things into your car and get discounted rates if you're a good driver, and then I mean that's fine because you are knowingly getting into that. I don't know all the details of this. I would
sometimes
there's probably somewhere in the language that they signed and just didn't read the fine print.
It's one of those screens probably that comes up that everybody completely, including myself, completely ignores. You know, be aware that blah 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 blah. You know, check
Privacy
here.
Policy, terms and conditions.
Yeah,
blah, blah, blah.
and it's probably somewhere where you inadvertently, it's like fine print. And you
Not
just
saying
clicked
it's right, but they probably have
got away
covered.
with it. And
they spend a lot of money on
yep.
this stuff.
The fact is that I think every auto company looks at all of this data about what you do and what you like and where you go as means of making money off you from selling for advertisers and, of course, insurance companies. So unfortunately, and I've said this for a long time, there really is no privacy today, even when you're home. And now I think it's certainly that way in cars. Anyone got another opinion?
I hate this with every fiber of my being.
Yeah. I think
it's a good thing you have that bell. I have a lot to say, and you need to get saved by it.
Well, go ahead.
I
got some thoughts.
Yeah.
Car insurance is already such a hassle to deal with, and it feels like every year rates just keep going up. And I know we can sit, inflation and all that, and they give all their reasons, and that's one thing. But to me, this is just another way for them to get more money out. The thing is, I think, I didn't read into it to the extent of maybe that I should have. Maybe it does track your good habits as well. But if I'm going to guess, I'm going to say your rate does not go down if you have you stop at every stop sign. Does it know, I'm using the blinker every time I have to get over? It probably doesn't track, and they probably don't care. They care that, he, went
he's
15
speeding,
over the speed limit, all that.
And he's not, or whatever.
And so they're just finding every way they can justify raising the rates. And it's the same thing, whereas, you buy your car for $40,000 and then 6 years goes by and now it's worth $25,000. Well, your rate didn't go down because it's a cheaper car now because it depreciated. Your rate probably went up because too bad. So I'm sure look, I agree that like when you plug something in to your car or you have something on your phone that tracks your driving, you've opted into that.
Correct.
And
you
I also
knowingly opted into it.
And I also agree with the fact that you're right. They've probably covered themselves with some sort of like you sign it, it's in the paperwork. But like in this case, especially, it's a rental car. What are you going to do? Sit there in the rental line for 30 minutes? Like, subsection 3, Article 2, Clause 12. I don't like that. Yeah, I'm not renting the car. Sorry. You're not going to do that. So here, I'm going to do this so we save us. Yep. There we go. I hate this.
I'll make a prediction that at some point this is going to become a big enough problem and loud enough complaints that there will be some kind of legislation either on the state level or federal level.
If this can save me money, then we can talk about it. But if it's not going to actively save me money.
Yeah, I mean, we saw it with some of the biggest tech companies answering questions about it.
Well, look, how many times do you go on a website now that you basically have to approve cookies or not cookies and all that? And that's now pretty much universal. So that's coming to your car as well.
Well, and it's so interesting is this happened in a Bolt EV. Like, who's hooning it in a Bolt? You know what I mean? Like, how crazy do you have to drive for your rates to go up 20%?
Let's all talk about Prius buyers.
Well,
now come on now, who is likely to pass you on an interstate? saving fuel probably as they go. They
What? Not a
think.
Prius. I
Oh,
thought they had.
come
I thought they
on.
had the opposite. I thought it was like you don't want to be stuck behind a Prius. I thought that was the.
Oh,
Well,
not the highways I travel.
Here's
I'm on John's side there.
here's my take on this. I think, every vehicle, pretty much every vehicle that you buy in 2024 is quote unquote connected.
Yeah.
So you almost cannot opt out of this. There is no opting out. Like if
They're all
if a
connected.
manufacturer puts this into their privacy policy, you literally can't go and buy a new car without some sort of data being taken. You can't use the radio because you can't even touch the infotainment without a thing coming up and saying, "Did you know?" Blah 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 blah. Hit enable or yes or approve, whatever. So that's my problem with it, and this might be ironic coming from me as like the social media, digital media person at MotorWeek, but maybe it's this job that's done it to me. But I slowly want to like step away from technology and all of the data that it's taking from our phones. I mean, using Apple CarPlay. I'm not even using a native system in the vehicle, and that's also taking my data. So I think we're going to see probably in the next 5 to 10 years, like you said, John, like legislation will
think
have to
so.
be introduced to really protect
To rein
all of
this
our
in.
data because I do find this a little bit unacceptable.
I think by
truthfully.
then, though, it's going to be too late. But I have to say, that is an interesting comment from you. Okay. We are going to move on to an email from Greg Bilton. Greg says, and this is something near and dear to my heart, what are your thoughts on the range of the new Mini models? Now, I'm taking this to mean that he's specifically talking about the 2025, we think,
Next
Mini
generation.
E and SE, their next generation all-electric of the Mini Cooper coupe. It'll be out in, just to refresh everyone's memory, there's going to be 2 models that we know of, the Mini E and the Mini SE. Right now, it's just the Mini SE. The current Mini SE's got a range of about 114 miles. It's all electric.
And chances are we probably won't get the E here in the U.S. That's a global product.
Well, maybe, but the
Maybe.
big question is right now is, if you stepping ahead, is the reason we have not seen it yet is that, according to Mini, because it's being assembled not in the UK but in China.
Correct.
There's a 26.5%, I think it is, tariff on Chinese vehicles, and they don't think they can sell it here profitably, which I'll get into in a moment, because if Buick can do it with a $23,000 vehicle, why can't they? But that's another one. Anyway, the current Mini has a 118-mile range. The global estimates for range on the Mini E, the new one, with a 41 kilowatt-hour battery, is about 190 miles. It's 184 horsepower. Now, this is not U.S. EPA rated. This is globally. The SE will have a larger 54 kilowatt-hour battery, 250 miles, 218 horsepower. What this boils down to by the time we get it here is probably going to be about 190 horsepower for the E and around 150 for the E and around 200 on the EPA cycle for the SE. So 250-mile range for the up-level vehicle, 150 for the $30,000 vehicle probably. Estimated price $30 to $35. It's going to be competing against the new Fiat 500e with 118 horsepower and 150-mile range. You've got the VW ID4 in for around 40 grand, and you've got the Nissan Leaf at 30,000, which is probably the bargain.
Forget about that.
With 150 miles. So do I think it's too short? Yes, of course I do. But if they can actually bring in, and Greg, this is my opinion, I have a Mini Cooper. I've been waiting for this new vehicle. I thought I could get away with the bottom basement E, but 150-mile practical U.S. range is not going to be enough for me.
Yeah.
If they can actually get to the 200 mark, that's okay. I think I could live with that because I don't drive my current Mini E except on the weekends, but it's how I drive it that really makes the difference. The Mini Cooper stands out because it is a car that's so much fun to drive, and the current Mini SE is. But when you only have a 118-mile range on it, how far can you go? So in some ways, I think Minnie's missing the boat here about why people in this country buy their vehicles. I'm sorry, it's not a city car. City cars don't tend to work in this country. So they better work really hard to get that SE model, at least, as high a range as possible if they hope to sell it here in any sizable numbers once it gets launched. So I agree with you, Greg. I think the numbers could be better, but they only have so much real estate to work with. That 52 kilowatt hour battery, a 54 kilowatt hour battery in the SE, got to remember that's a little bit more than half the size of the battery that's in the Kia EV6.
Yeah.
A lot of stuff's got about a 90 kilowatt hour battery, so it's a pretty good size battery for that smaller car.
Even like the ID4 has like a 62, 65 kilowatt hour battery.
But it's a bigger car.
Yeah, true.
It's quite a bit bigger.
But yeah, it's a lot of pros, give and take.
But I do think that if they do bring in the bottom basement vehicle, the E, and they actually do price it at $30,000, they've got a lot of competition, including the Fiat 500e. So my hope is they'll bring in a 200-mile vehicle. They'll call it the SE. They'll charge a little bit of a premium over maybe the Fiat 500e and call it a day. But it's still going to be a tough choice for a lot of folks. And now I completely
we'll see if John
took that
owns
question
one by
on.
next year.
No, other questions. I mean, others. You have an opinion. You have opinions. You've all mostly experienced the current SE. Here we're going to have one that's basically got 50 to 75% or whatever more range. It's still going to be expensive for a small car. Is that enough in this country?
I think it's going to be better, but I remember the last SE that we had in for testing. We'd have to tow it to the track.
Right.
Like
we could not drive it to our racetrack.
You
and run
can't,
it.
like, for testing, because you would use up almost all of your charge, or all the charge that you needed to actually perform the instrumented tests properly. And that, I mean, the track's not that, I mean, it's not close, but it's not that far. And I know
an hour
even,
and a half.
and I even know, John, we had been talking about this, and just simple jaunts become more complicated.
You worry. I mean, I'm sorry, but even we have that range anxiety, folks. So
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, I was going to jump in on the being around the 200-mile range.
we used to think that was really good.
Yeah, well, we have an EV6 GT that is rated at 206.
Good point.
Right.
Now, we often, when we're finished charging, see something like 230. But we're finding that it is around the 200-mile mark, and especially the way we drive in something that's that fun to drive and is that powerful, we're probably seeing 200 or less. What? So
I won't take. I won't take a long trip.
Yeah, I mean, and I'll commute to. I live about an hour from our station, and I'll commute with it. But I will say, I catch myself more so in that car than any other, checking the range. And my advice to anybody who is going to move forward with something around 200 miles of range, for the vast majority of your driving, just pay attention to the percentage of battery left. Don't look at the miles, because you'll freak yourself out
That's
with
a
the
great
miles.
piece of advice.
Once you get to about 30%, start looking at your mileage just to know that you can get to where you need to be and charge and whatever. But you'll just drive yourself crazy if you're constantly watching. Because once you drop below that 200 threshold, for me personally, I'm like,
It's
oh,
a
man,
psychological factor.
And it's totally psychologically, because I've never had an issue. But when I look and see less than 200, I'm starting to see 150. Then I'm like, maybe I need to find a charger. So just look at the percentage.
It's almost like when you're driving a petrol-powered vehicle and you get below half, especially when you get down to a quarter of a tank. We're conditioned to start looking for a place to fuel up, and it's really very similar. Not to take away from the EV6 GT, fabulous vehicle to commute in, to say the least.
Oh, yeah, I love it.
So anyway, Greg, I hope that sort of answers your question. Wish there was more, probably won't be, but I don't know. They haven't come out with official numbers yet. They haven't even subjected it to the EPA yet, as far as we know. We'll see where it goes from here, but I just wish it would get here.
I know.
All right.
It looks so good.
Speaking of electrics, Rivian, who has really not been doing as well as anyone expected recently. They're burning through cash, even though they're selling their R1T and R1S reasonably well. They did about a little under 80,000 units last year, but they've said they're not going to do much better than that this year. I think to hype and keep interest in the brand, they have now come out with 2 new SUVs, supposedly under that 70 grand mark that where most of their vehicles are now. The R2 and R3, and I have to say, I was surprised that they did 2. We were expecting 1. But Jessica, why don't you give us the details? What are the R2 and R3? How do they differ? What do we know about them so far? They look pretty much like family members. It's not like they're unusual looking.
Yeah. Styling wise, I mean, the R2 looks like a baby R1S. It's a little 5-seater, boxy crossover with the same exact design language.
And I should point out, they're not trying to do pickup versions of either of these 2 yet. It'll strictly be SUVs.
No, and I don't think they will do pickup versions. I think the R1T kind of is
It does that.
The size of it, I don't see how you could make something small, that much smaller, that wouldn't be like Ford Maverick sized, because that's also in between full size and mid-size. 2 things to point out probably at the head of this. These are coming in 2026, so 2 years away.
And we know how that can slip.
Yeah, but Rivian says that this R2 is supposed to start around $45,000. So if it does, it will be incredibly competitive. But again, you know, like first editions come first, and those are usually like a $20,000 premium. So you might not see a $45,000 one until 2027. Just want to put that disclaimer out there.
And they've also put a hold on their new factory.
Yes, that's in Georgia, I believe. That's where it is. So the R2 will still be built in Normal, Illinois, which is where the R1T and the R1S are also built. They have said that they moved forward their production timeline to get it out to people, and so because of that, it will be built in Illinois. But they did say that even the 45,000 version will hit 300 miles of range, which means that they have like 2 versions of battery packs. So probably we'll see 300 to hopefully over 350, almost 400 miles of range on some of these models. You have single motor, rear-wheel drive version, a dual motor with all-wheel drive, and a tri-motor. So lots of different powertrain options, which is really interesting. But I think it's got a lot of just really cool features of it that they showed
Which
off.
is a hallmark of their brand.
So they now have like apparently, which I didn't realize, is the R1T and the R1S didn't have glove boxes. So now they have 2 glove boxes for lots of storage on the inside. The interior looks very similar, super simple, where you just have that center display, kind of very Tesla-like, but different in more of like a utilitarian sort of rugged way that Rivian likes to do. The second row seats fold flat, but so do the first row. So you can fold all of the seats in the vehicle flat. So if you wanted to go camping, you could easily sleep inside, or like say you were, I don't know, moving or going anywhere where you're just wanting
Or
to
you got that
load up.
really long surfboard.
Yeah, surfboard or a kayak or whatever. And then it also has the rear glass, which just rolls right down into the lift gate.
I wish more people would do that.
Which is
Man, that
fantastic.
is a feature I would love to have.
I saw a Tundra, a new Tundra the other day.
has it as
has
well.
that,
Yep.
and I was like, I'm open air. Who doesn't love that? And then also not just that, the rear glass, but the rear glass on the side pops out.
Like the old minivans.
Yeah, I mean, so it's just like really quirky things that nobody else is doing anything quite like this. And let's see, what else? They have, like I said, deliveries are going to start in the first half of 2026. So, I mean, this time 2 years from now, we'll probably see the R2. But the biggest surprise was they were
the
debuting the
R3.
R3, which is even smaller than the R2, which means it'll be priced underneath that $45,000 mark. I don't know where. I would guess somewhere in like the $35,000 mark.
Oh, these are all going to have price creep anyway, but yeah.
They're built on the same platform, which is not like that. It's like a they have like it's like a hybrid architecture, which is really interesting. It looks like a hatchback in a way. I don't know if anybody else got that vibe. Like it's got this like slant back.
More
in
of a
the rear.
slant back. It's more like it's not a coupe, but it's kind of going that direction.
They want it. It's like they said it's their take on a crossover.
Right.
So but the design language is still very, very Rivian. Like in the front, still has those like headlights and stuff. But it is smaller. It has like a lift gate on the lift gate, so like the rear glass like comes up. So
we haven't seen that in a while either.
Store more stuff in there. It's got like that you can fold all the seats flat just like the R2. It's got the double glove box. It's got all that same design language. A lot of shared parts, which I think is really great because I think that's what people like about Rivian. And it's got like the same powertrain setups as the R2. A lot of very similar stuff.
I mean, we've seen it with Volkswagen, the two versions of the Atlas. We've seen it with others, but it does seem that they've tried to differentiate it in features a little bit.
Kind
the
of.
R2 and R3.
Yeah, and but specifically, one thing that they brought out with the R3, they actually brought out a special version of the R3 called the R3X. Which is like their rugged, even more rugged take on the R3. It's got like beefier tires, more ground clearance. It only comes in the tri-motor powertrain. It has like a cool
rock crawler, in
interior
other words,
on it. So yeah, just really, really interesting product that like if Rivian can stay afloat and keep making cars and still kind of stay alive. When these come around in 2026, I mean, I think everybody's going to be pretty caught up by then, but it's going to still be, I think, a competitive offering.
People ask us frequently, of some of these new upstart car companies, are they going to survive? We obviously think that Tesla will, and I give Rivian a better than 50-50 chance, but especially if they can launch these two new vehicles, because it will expand their market share substantially.
They can do it sooner than later.
Yeah.
Are they taking deposits or anything yet?
Yeah, they have like it's like $100 deposits.
I had a feeling this feels like it's taken out of the Tesla playbook.
Well, you should have seen this.
Absolutely.
The stock went, went upward.
They probably need a little cash, and to their credit, they have made a product. They've identified what people like, and I'll put it this way: with it debuting last week, was it last week? Whenever it was.
Yeah.
I got text messages from my wife, my dad, people being like, "Oh, you driving the new Rivian?" Like, so people who aren't as tuned into the market as I am,
they got a good
texting me
coverage.
about it, asking about that, and I unfortunately couldn't tell them because I'm like, I didn't watch I was doing something else.
And I don't think they'll do what they did with the R1, which is drastically change the price at the last minute.
I hope not.
That was a disastrous. Actually, I think that's part of the reason they're having so much problems.
Is there ever a moment, John, in automotive market or any where somebody's come to market earlier than they said they would, like out of necessity? Like this,
I honestly don't think so.
Like, what if like a year from now, Rivian's struggling even more? Like, we got to sell car, we got to do something. Is there any chance in history that they could be like, we're going to push this forward and maybe get it out a half a year, 6 months, or a year in advance?
I think they would somehow have to find another source of money. Now, I wouldn't put it past some other established automaker or even a company like Amazon to come in and take a big stake in them, because now that Amazon's not going to do its own electric vehicle, it wouldn't surprise me.
It's like, this is so exciting right now for Rivian owners and prospective Rivian owners.
I mean, Amazon already owns part of them.
Until you tell them it's not coming out for 2 years.
Yeah.
That's a real buzzkill.
Yeah.
Well, we all know with traditional automakers, let's talk about the Chevrolet Blazer. How long have we been seeing that, the EV?
That's back on sale, though. We're going to see it
finally
soon,
back
John.
on sale. All right. Well, on those high notes, we think, we're going to end up our podcast today. And thank you all out there for listening. We've had a good time here. I hope you did. Now, if you're wondering what time MotorWeek, the television series, can be seen on your local public television station, be sure to go to our website, motorweek.org, click on the tab Watch MotorWeek, and then enter your zip code for the days and times in your area, or hop over to our cable partner, mavtv.com, for their schedule. You can also stream MotorWeek episodes for free on your mobile device or streaming box, as we mentioned earlier, by downloading the PBS app, available at your app store or streaming channel library. And don't forget, folks, download that PBS app. Also, all of the individual road test and feature segments are also available at youtube.com/MotorWeek. We say here at MotorWeek, if you've got a screen, you can watch MotorWeek. I want to thank Greg Carlos, Alex Kellum, our podcast producer, Jessica Ray, our audio engineer, Austin Harris. This is his last podcast. He's leaving us for, it seems like this is becoming a phobia. He's leaving us for a great opportunity. We wish Austin all the luck in the world. We're going to miss you, Austin. Also, our podcast creator, Bob Mixter. Meanwhile, and until then, I'm John Davis. Thanks for being a part of MotorWeek.
You have been listening to the podcast of MotorWeek, television's original automotive magazine. MotorWeek is made possible by Auto Value and Bumper to Bumper and TireRack.com. For additional information on podcasts, videos, and showtimes, visit our website at motorweek.org. And watch MotorWeek, television's longest-running automotive magazine series each week on your local PBS station.